structure and main point of this passage. So where did a group mark the first section? So 112 to where?
You just said to 113.
To 113?
Yeah.
We had 2-1.
You said 2-1. Okay, so let me do this. Let's do a bigger section and some subs. So why did you guys do 112 to 2-1?
We felt like Habakkuk's second complaint, like all of that is dialogue from Habakkuk to God, so it's all encapsulated in one.
Okay, so you saw this as like one big section on his second complaint. All right, now why did you guys break it at 13?
It was describing God's character. And he started off with reminding himself, praising God, who his character is, and asking the question.
Right. Yes, because so it's a focus on God's character, and specifically what about God's character?
His holiness.
His holiness, right? And why does Habakkuk bring up God's character here?
Because it just seems contradictory to what his answer was.
Yep. Yeah, so God's character, holy, but using evil. This doesn't make sense to him, right?
Yeah.
Good, all right. So then 114 goes to where? Then as a 17, what other groups agree with that? As like a sub under this? Seeing some nods, I think. Yep, 114, 117. So what's going on in 114 to 17? An analogy, yep. And what is this analogy that, that he's breaking down? How about the group back right, Grace's group? How would you summarize what's going on in this analogy?
We kind of broke it up a little.
Okay, all right. So how did you guys break it up?
So we did 12 to 17.
Yep.
As one chunk with two subsections.
Yep.
12 to 14 and 15 to 17.
Okay. So then, so instead of that 15 to 17 section, how did you try to summarize that?
So we separated them by 12 to 14 being to the Lord.
Yep.
First person, or second person rather. And then 15 to 17 being third person.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then didn't say anything about the analogy, but we did talk about like the section 12 to 17 in total.
Yep.
Habakkuk speaks like the covenant promises of God is everlasting, like being everlasting,
Right.
etc.
Yep. Yeah. So you got that focus on his character, just like the other group saw, right? Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Good. Good. So and I think that's really cool that you guys are picking up on that change, right? From second person, you, and then he starts the analogy in second person, right? You make mankind like the fish of the sea, and then he changes to third person, right? So who is the he in the third person in the analogy?
King of the Chaldeans.
The wicked, the king of the Chaldeans, yep. So, because the king can stand for the whole people, right? So this analogy is, right, of evil getting away with it, right? Basically he's like, you're like an off-duty lifeguard. Like, stuff is going down in the pool and it's not good and you've just walked away. That's what it feels like, right? And this guy's going on and he's just fishing it and he's just, bringing all these fish and you're just letting him get away with it. And then did you guys have 2-1 as its own section then?
Yes, we did.
All right. How about this group? I don't think you guys have said something yet. So how about, maybe you have, but 2-1, how'd you guys summarize that? Or I guess you guys had the whole big section, never
We
mind.
would just say Habakkuk's ready for God to answer.
Have ready for an answer, yep. Because he's like, there's got to be more here, God, right? Okay, so then I'm guessing at least one group probably did like 2 to 220 is like a big section, God's answer. Is that correct, or did anybody do that? Yep.
We did like 2 to 5, and then 6 to 20.
All right. Did other groups do something similar?
Yep.
Yep, we did 2 to 19,
Okay.
and then kind of had the smaller breakups.
Okay, yep.
We had 20 completely by itself.
Okay, 20 by itself. Okay. All right, we'll get to that in a minute. So, all right. So for 2 to 5, what's kind of going on in this section? How did a group try to summarize it?
He said, justice will come, but the righteous must wait for it in faith.
Okay. Justice will come, wait by faith, or in faith.
We saw 2:5, like, as a summary of the following verses.
Okay, yep, so you might put like, so here, I'll put a 4/5 here, and then a 5/6 here.
I actually was wrong. We did 2 to 3, and then we did 4 to 19.
Okay,
So,
all right. Yeah, but we're seeing here, right, there's this initial kind of like, okay, it's coming, wait for it, and then there's going to be a follow-up section, right? And what is this longer follow-up section doing? Whether you'd started at around 4/5 or 5 or 6.
So it specifies the things that they're doing, so their violence, their drinking, their
Yep.
idolatry, their greed. And then it says what will happen from each of these. So their wine is a traitor, so then it goes into description of their drunkenness. And so they're live by the sword, you're gonna have death.
Yeah, right.
Wickedness will be their own downfall.
Yes, so you guys probably saw that pattern, right? There's this, even you could even subdivide this more, right, by the woes, right? So you could have like 6 to 8, is a woe. Then you've got 9 to 11 is a section of woe, 12 to 14, 15 to 17, 18 to 20, right? You can have all these woes. Well, yeah, I know. But you could probably see, right, that what's fascinating is that everything they're doing, God's going to turn it back on their own head, right? That the very things they're doing is what God's going to use to come back on their own head, right?
It's interesting that I saw in like verse 9, so when him who gets evil gain for his own house, like he's gaining all these things.
Yep.
But other people are seeing it, and so it's separating them off, and eventually that's just going to
Yep.
crush them.
Yeah, and if you build a town with blood, verse 12, well, you're just going to wear yourself for nothing in the end, because because think about, like, when you're building an empire, the idea is it's just going to last, and it's going to be this testament to our glory. And he says in 14, now the only one whose glory is going to stand at the end of the days is the Lord's. You can build your empire, and it's like that poem of Ozymandias, right? Have you ever heard that poem where the guy goes out in the desert and sees just the bare bones of what probably was a majestic statue, and it says here lies Ozymandias, the great conqueror, and no one knows who the guy's name is or what empire he's a part of. The whole point is all these human achievements in the end fall apart to dust, right? But the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord, right? So you got all these kind of woes here, right? And then you guys mentioned verse 20 on its own, so I want to hear your thoughts on that. Why did you put 20 on its own?
It's but the Lord. So all these woes and sorrows.
Yep.
And bad things, and then it's that tone shift. But, however, and it ends with hope.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Solomon in that sense.
Yeah, it definitely is this high cap, right? That despite all of this, and this is really important for us to see, in an ancient Near Eastern context, they believed that the gods were connected to people and to a land, all right? So if your land is conquered and you are conquered, that means your God is conquered. Okay, that's how they would think, right? And yet God's saying, no, I'm going to let you guys get judged and you're going to go into exile, but that's not because I lost, because I'm still in my temple in the heavens. And I'm still ruling over it all, right? Which is why Habakkuk can say things like, are you not from everlasting? We shall not die. Because if we go into exile, God, if we die, then that looks bad on you, right? Which is why, for example, back in 1 Samuel, right, when the Philistines, defeat the Israelites, and they bring the ark, and they're like, ha, see, we've got the ark. Our God's more powerful. And then, they show up in the morning and their statue of Dagon's face down, bowing down in worship to Yahweh, right? Because God's no, I'm in charge here. I didn't let the ark go to the Philistine because I'm weak. I did it in judgment on my people, and I'm still going to show you who's boss too, right?
Interesting too, because we all think hey, God, if you don't do this, you not look good. If you don't heal this person, it's making you not look good. So it's just,
Yep.
I'll have my own plan.
Yep, God's got his own plan. It will come, wait in faith, right? So, okay, so how did kind of seeing the structure of Habakkuk saying like, God, I don't understand your character and what's going on here. I'm waiting for an answer. And God says, don't worry, wait for it, because I am bringing judgment for all of their woes. How did that help you pull together a one-sentence kind of main point? Anybody want to take a stab at it? Maybe we'll put up 2 if we have 2, because I know some of you are scrambling at the end to try to get something down. So, all right, back here, I got a volunteer.
Something like God reassures Habakkuk to have faith that those who are doing the injustice will be punished.
God reassures Habakkuk
To have faith
that
those who are doing the injustice will be punished.
Okay. What do you guys think? Is that pretty good? Yeah, I think that's good for you. Just all right. Another group. I always like hearing how different people put it, and you see how, just when Jason led us, right? You saw how there was a lot of similarity, and that's a good indication you're on the right track. If other Christians are like, "Yep, that's basically the same thing I saw too." If you're the only one seeing it, that's always a good opportunity to say, "Maybe I'm seeing this wrong." So, another group.
We heard, okay.
Yep.
No, Michelle.
God is holy and has a plan and a perfect timeline. We may not understand his timing and it may seem slow, but God's justice is true and ultimate.
All right, I'm going to condense it a bit on the fly, just because.
I can't write.
All right, God is holy and has a perfect plan for ultimate justice. So we have to wait for it.
Yes.
Yeah. All right, great. I think these are pretty good. Maybe, did you want to throw out yours too? Or do you think it's basically the same?
We're just kind of getting to that at the end. We had something like, at the appointed time, God's justice will be completely just, but the righteous must wait for it in faith. So
Yep.
Mike made a good point in terms of, the reason we put completely in there is to say there's an escalation of like houses, towns, cities, comparison from God to God, and there's like this,
Yep.
everything they're doing will be seen to be futile.
Yeah, in the end, but it's going to build up to it, yeah. Yeah, exactly, right? And we kind of see back in verse 4 that there's these 2 different responses, right? That on the one hand, you could be arrogant and puffed up and thinking you're all that in a bag of chips, like the Babylonians think they are. They're doing just fine, but they're going to get their comeuppance. Or the righteous lives by trusting, right? So now let's think about, I'm going to leave the main points down here for a minute. I want us to think about this principle of Christ connection now, because we've got this main point, right? But it's very much for Habakkuk's audience back then. How do we connect it to Christ before we connect it to us? So the whole idea of Christ connection, you can flip over to your page if you want, right, is that the Bible is one story, Genesis to Revelation, with one capital A author, it's God, and with one capital H here, and that's Jesus. And because it's one story, it all connects, right? And you can go to Luke chapter 24, you can look at John 5, where Jesus both tells the Pharisees, like, hey, you search the scriptures thinking you'll find life in them, but they point to me. That's John 5. And in Luke 24, he tells his disciples, hey, everything that's written in the law of Moses and the prophets and the Psalms, it was fulfilled in me. And so that threefold division, the law, that's the first 5 books. The prophets is what the Jews call any books that involve prophets. So that includes Joshua and all the history books. They have prophets in them, and what we call the prophets. And the Psalms is like shorthand for all the wisdom books. So it's the whole Old Testament. Jesus is saying all of that points to me. So if we're not reading our Bibles and seeing how it points to Jesus, we're not reading our Bibles the way Jesus wants us to. And we're missing out on real transformation in life. And so the drawing to help remember this is the cross represents Jesus and what he did. And it's like there's all these roads. All right. And there are some passages that are kind of like the main highway straight to Jesus. You know, Isaiah 53 is one of those, right? Like a lamb led to the slaughter. You're like, oh, bam, that's so easy to see Jesus. Other passages in the Bible are more like little dirt roads, off side roads, off main roads, off major highways, right? But we do want to follow the path to see how it gets us to Jesus. We don't want to artificially jump there. We want to get there naturally. And what that means is we're going to use the main point of the passage to guide us to Jesus. So rather than just looking for a random connection, we want to ask, how does the main point us to Jesus? And we're going to know we're doing this well if the picture that we see in Jesus is just a colorized version of the black and white we've already seen in the Old Testament. It's not going to create a new picture. It's going to create a richer, deeper picture of what we're already seeing, right? Because God inspired the Old Testament. He's not schizophrenic. So it's not going to completely change, but it's going to be fulfilled in a deeper, richer way. And this is where oftentimes we see these beautiful things, right? So there's an acronym that is in your page there that I got from a friend, where he just took a lot of different ways and different books to get to Jesus and created an acronym to help us remember. So it's the Christ acronym. So C stands for command. So is the main point of the passage a command that we're called to obey? If yes, we want to ask, how did Jesus fulfill this for us? And then how does he now by the Spirit enable us to live it out? So for example, say if you have the command, do not murder. Well, Jesus tells us to really obey that command, you can't even have a hateful thought against someone. I'm guessing you've had a hateful thought against someone, at least once in your life. So we've fallen short. But here's the good news, right? Jesus didn't fall short in that. And because he died in our place, he fulfilled that for us, and now he gives us his Spirit to help us lean into it. So what's amazing is when we see commands through the light of the gospel, we don't just go, oh, I got to try harder. We go, wow, isn't it amazing what Jesus did for me, even though I fall short? Jesus, would you help me now to try to live this out? You're still doing the same command, but now you're doing it not motivated out of a legalistic self-righteousness, but out of a gospel motivation, right? H is for hope, or promise, but promise didn't fit the acronym. So the idea here is the main point of this passage basically a promise that God makes that's fulfilled in Jesus. So you can think about, say, Genesis 3, right, where there's this promise made that one day, despite our sin, Jesus is going to send a seed of the woman to crush the serpent's head, right? And we see how that's fulfilled in Jesus, right? R is for recurring theme. And I'm also going to talk about type because they're very similar. The idea is there a way that God's at work in this passage that's similar to how he works in Jesus in a greater way? And a type is just the idea that a person, place, event in the Old Testament has meaning in and of itself, but also acts as kind of like a cookie cutter shape of what Jesus will be like when he comes. So for example, maybe a recurring theme could be we see in the Passover that God rescues his people through the sacrifice of a lamb. And that becomes a pattern for how God's going to save eventually in Jesus, right? A type could be we see David, the anointed king. God works through his anointed king, and allegiance to his anointed king is what brings life. Well, that's true in Jesus. I is for ill. Is something broken in this Old Testament passage that only Jesus can come fix? So think about the Tower of Babel. You read the Tower of Babel, and it's like rebellion, dispersed, end of story. There's no good news in that story, right? It's just everything's broken and falling apart. But in Jesus, and by the sending of the Spirit, at Pentecost, the nations can understand each other again, and they're drawn back to Jesus, right? So we see how he fixes this. And the S is story. Does this Old Testament passage advance the story of God's redeeming work? So that's very common in Old Testament narrative, like we talked about Ruth last time, right? Where on one hand, the baby born to Ruth redeems Ruth and Naomi and provides for them, right? But on the other hand, it's part of God's work to bring about one day the final baby to redeem and rescue us all, right? And so we look for these ways. And so you take your main point and you go, does this main point fit as a command, a hope? And it's not going to be all of them, but you can kind of fit it through this grid to say which one makes the most sense. And sometimes there might be a couple and you might pick the best one. But that's going to help keep you on track and not just randomly go wherever. Now, another thing that's really helpful in this is to ask, does the New Testament draw from this passage? Because if yes, then save yourself the work and look at what the New Testament does with it, right? But what's really helpful to do is ask, well, how is the New Testament using it? Is the New Testament seeing a command Is it seeing a promise, a recurring theme, an ill, a story, a type? Because that's what they're doing. And you'll learn to see that's what the New Testament does when they quote it. So let's go back to Habakkuk 1, to 11 for a minute. Did you know that it's quoted in the book of Acts? And we looked at chapter 1, right? We talked about how the main point is something along the lines of like Habakkuk cries out, do the injustice, and God gives a surprising answer, right? So flip over to Acts 13 with me for a minute. So Paul is in a synagogue preaching, and he explains all about how the Old Testament's pointing to Jesus, okay, in Acts 13. And then at the very end, here's his application, starting at verse 38 of Acts 13. Let it be known to you, therefore, brothers and sisters, that through this man, Jesus, forgiveness of sins is proclaimed to you. And by him, everyone who believes is freed from everything from which you could not be freed by the law of Moses. Beware, therefore, lest what is said in the prophets should come about. Quote, look, you scoffers, be astounded and perish, for I am doing a work in your days, a work that you would not believe, even if one tells it to you. That's Habakkuk 1:5. It's quoted from the Greek translation, so it's slightly different, but it's basically the same quote. Why is he quoting Habakkuk 1:5 when he's talking about Jesus? Right? It's because he sees a recurring theme, a pattern of how God's at work. He goes, okay, in Habakkuk, the problem was our own sinfulness as a people, and we couldn't fix it. And God's answer was to use a foreign, evil nation to bring judgment that will eventually lead to salvation. And no one would believe it. Fast forward to the time of Jesus. What do you have? You have God's people still not obeying the law perfectly. He raises up an evil nation that even has the eagle as their symbol, the Romans. And the way that he solves their sin problem is he lets this evil government judge and condemn the only perfect innocent one. And that's the way he's going to save them. And it's ridiculous. No one would have thought this up. And so just like in Habakkuk's day, where Habakkuk would be tempted to be like, that's not an answer, God, I want a different one. He's saying, just like that, today, you might be tempted to hear about Jesus and go, that's not the answer I want a different one. And so that's why he quotes Habakkuk, because he's seeing the pattern and saying, this is the same pattern happening again, but now in Jesus. That God is dealing with our sin problem in a way that no one would have ever thought of. Right? And so that's what he's doing. So it might at first glance seem random, but what he's done is he's taken Habakkuk and said, this is a pattern for how God works that's ultimately fulfilled in Jesus. So here we are in Habakkuk chapter 2, right? And we're seeing the main point is God reassures Habakkuk to have faith that evildoers will be punished in the end, right? Or God's holy has a perfect plan for ultimate justice. We have to wait for it by faith, right? Well, that verse that you guys are all drawing on, Habakkuk 2:4, the righteous shall live by faith, is used 3 times in the New Testament. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to break you up into groups, and you're going to look at one of these New Testament passages and think through how is the New Testament author using Habakkuk 2:4, tying it to this main point. Are they seeing a command? Are they seeing a promise? Are they seeing a recurring theme, an ill? Is this advancing the story? Is this a type? What connection are they making here? Okay, and that's going to help us make our own connections, all right? So let's do this. Let's have this group here. You guys do Romans 1:17. You might need to read a couple of verses around it. So Romans 1:17. Jason's group back there, you guys do Galatians 3:11. And then both of these groups, I want you to work on Hebrews 10:38.